Okay, so I'm here with Patrick, and we are going to read the end of chapter three. I'm going to try this. I think it's a good way to get us reading together. So let's begin chapter three. And Patrick sometimes doesn't like to be filmed, so okay. I'm on page 76, and you can read along if you'd like, or you can just listen as we read together. I don't remember whose idea it was to rip off the drive-in. We usually sneaked in there through several holes we created in the corrugated steel fence alongside the Alhambra Wash, a concrete tributary of the Rio Hondo, which snaked through here. We built ourselves a makeshift hangout among the bushes and weeds that lined the fence, the hideaway of Los Cuatro. We used wood planks for a roof. We found old carpet and metal siding to cover the ground and sides. We used banana leaves to cover the entrances. It wasn't easy to find. One night, as we relaxed on an old sofa watching the drive-in movie, it was decided that we would go in after the cars left and rob the concession stand. Many times we would break in there for food, but this time it was for the night's receipts. Jean, I want you to hold the cohete, Yuck Yuck said. Chale ese, I claimed. I'm not up for it today. I don't feel good about it. What is this feel stuff? Yuck Yuck said. I'm not asking for a temperature. Then he gave out his Yuck Yuck laugh. I had on a long black trench coat. The others were in their cholo attire. I peeled back a section of fence and walked through. The march to the concession stand was sustained and arduous. I held the small caliber handgun in my hand through the long pockets of the trench coat. Sweat smeared the handle. Chicharron walked in first, then signaled the rest of us to follow. The concession stand looked empty. Wheelo walked up to the cash register and rang it up to check for money. Nothing. Yuck Yuck probed around while I stood there, wishing the night would end, hoping nobody would be there. Then an older, fat, white-haired guy walked in from another room. What the heck is going on here? He said as we ransacked the stand. I thrust out the gun and yelled, "Freeze!" And then another word I cannot say. It had so much conviction I failed to recognize the voice. Tension sizzled in the air. He stood there, just staring. I stood there, gun pointed in his direction. Yuck Yuck walked up to him and demanded money. It's in the safe, the man said. You can't get to it. Blank you, Yuck Yuck exclaimed. You can open the safe. No, I can't, the man continued. The only one who can get to it is the owner, and there's no way he would be here tonight. I'm on page 78. Yeah, let's leave, I thought, before the police came, before somebody with a bigger weapon than mine showed up. I don't believe you, Yuck Yuck said, and me thinking, believe him. Believe him. Yuck Yuck yanked the man down on the floor and walked into the adjacent room where presumably the safe was stashed. I continued to point the gun down on the man as he lay on his belly like a beached whale. Then Yuck Yuck pushed open the door and ran out of the room. Gunfire blasted a hole in the wood, splinters sailing around us. Get the blank out of here, Yuck Yuck yelled. I suppose I could have fired the gun, but I took off just behind Chicharron and Wheelo. Whoever it was who fired ran out of the concession stand and shot into the dark toward us. We bobbed and fobbed, zigged and zagged. Shoot at him, somebody said. What? I responded in between breaths. Shoot at him, everybody chimed in unison. I turned around and saw a shadow highlighted by a fluorescent lamp above his head. He continued to hold a gun in two hands. I aimed at him, but then he fired again, and I swear the bullet brushed my eyebrow. That's how close it felt. Blanket, I ran. Unfortunately, we went in a direction away from the section of the fence where we could exit from. Yuck Yuck looked lost for a moment, then began to climb. It's not easy to scale a corrugated steel fence, but Chicharron and Wheelo followed suit. I dropped the gun in my trench coat pocket and climbed also. Suddenly, everything slowed down. I couldn't do anything fast enough. The dude shooting at us appeared closer and fired another round. I yelled as a bullet struck the fence, resounding in a metal echo peal next to my ear. I tried to get over fast. I hoped I wouldn't lose my grip and fall back down. There's nowhere to position your sneakers when you climbed a corrugated steel. It was muscle and hustle all the way. I reached to the top. I could hear Chicharron, Wheelo, and Yuck Yuck yelling at me like a squad of cheerleaders. Come on, orale ese, you can do it. Come on, Chin, jump man, jump. I pulled myself over and then leapt, the trench coat like a huge cape fluttering around me. A bullet ripped through the air I had been occupying just seconds earlier. I encountered the ground, then took off like a desert rabbit. De volada. And that's the end of chapter 3. You know, I think what's beautiful and so interesting about Rodriguez's descriptions is that they are so matched to the moment. I mean, this moment, the end of chapter 3, has such high intensity, like we talked about in our Zoom class. But just take a look at just on page 79, how many similes there are on that page. He says, I could hear Chicharron, Wheelo, and Yuck Yuck yelling at me like a squad of cheerleaders. I pulled myself over them and lapped the trench coat like a huge cape fluttering around me. And then finally I encountered the ground, then took off like a desert rabbit. I mean, it's interesting to really go through here and think about all the similes and how Rodriguez uses them. What I also like about not only this chapter, but a lot of his writing is the intermingling, the mix of Spanish and English, and at what points he uses Spanish. I think that's an interesting little research project to think about why, and everything is intentional, right, that an author chooses to do. We know this from what we talked about with August Wilson. So why is he using de volada, right, at the very end to be his last words of that chapter? With haste. And that phrase in Spanish, with haste, is used again, or for the first time in this chapter, I believe, on page 76, right in this area here. So the repetition is interesting. I also like how he uses dialogue to really up the momentum and the intensity, especially with the back and forth in that moment when they're trying to escape. And I also like how he uses the description to build the image of this fence. It's not just a fence, it's corrugated metal. So it's really rough metal, and it's more like a wall. And he's saying it's just impossible to climb, especially with sneakers. They just slide right down. So his when Luis Rodriguez is very specific to build images like that, sometimes as readers, I think we just skip it and we read over the extra words, but that's why it makes it like a poem. It's beautiful. And Luis Rodriguez is a poet. And then real quick, he does use the other language piece of creating onomatopoeia. So that's when the sounds are heard through words that sound like sound. So he has the hustle and the bustle, which is sort of like, to me, when he says it, I can kind of see the action. And then there's also this zigged and zagged that's earlier on. We bobbed and fobbed, zigged and zagged. That's just really great. It's almost like they're in the water, kind of going like this, right? And like this. You could see the motion, which is pretty awesome. So I'm going to be doing this next week where I'm going to give you chunks of the reading, and Patrick and I will read together just little pieces of the chapter for the next chapter, chapter 4. You're free to do that. You're free to read it traditionally or read it online for the link that I post. And this way, at least it's creating some sort of interaction, even though it's virtual and not real time. And it's nice, especially next week, we'll play around with visual thinking strategies when I read it out loud. So until then, have a great weekend. Have a beautiful Friday, and enjoy as much as possible the language of Luis Rodriguez as you read this weekend.